The dome light was the brightest thing for 2 miles, and Dale Keough had it off inside 4 seconds, because brightness made a man easy to find. He sat in the dark of the cab with the engine ticking and his hands still on the key he had not turned. And he listened to the thing breathe on the far side of the guardrail. Not labored, not winded from running. A slow, even bellows draw with a catch at the top of it, the way a barrel fills and overfills. And under that, draw a second sound he had no word for. A low chatter that lived in his sternum more than in his ears. He had pulled onto the gravel shoulder of Route 9 at 11:51 because a doe had stood in his lane and would not move. And now the doe was gone, and he could not say where, and the breathing was coming from the place she had stood. Dale ran a sand and gravel pit 19 miles north of where he sat, and he had run it for 22 years. And the men who worked the pit said he could read a load by sound the way other men read a gauge. He knew the difference between a belt about to throw and a belt merely complaining. He knew when a haul truck's brakes had glazed by the smell before the temperature light came on. He had walked off a high wall an hour before it sheared because the seep at its base had changed color from rust to a paler tan, and he had ordered the loader back and stood in the yard and watched 40 feet of bank come down where 2 men had been working, and he had not said much about it afterward except to note that the ground tells you if you have spent enough years learning its dialect. He did not exaggerate. He did not round numbers up to make a story. Land better at the counter of the diner in Callaway, where he took his coffee. When a man asked him how deep the pit ran, he said, 110 feet at the low corner and not a foot more, and if the man pressed, he would take him out and show him the survey stake. He carried a folding rule in his back pocket the way other men carried a phone, and he had been known to stop a conversation to measure a thing that someone had estimated, not to win a point, but because an estimate left a small wrongness in the air that only a number could clear. He measured because measuring was the only honest way he knew, to hold the world still. So when he tells this, and he tells it rarely, he tells it the way he reads a load. The doe stood in the northbound lane at 11:49 with her head turned away from his headlights, which was wrong because a deer in a beam turns toward it or bolts. And this one did neither. She stood with her ears flat and her flank trembling and her head cranked back toward the tree line, as if her body wanted to run one way, and something held her face the other. He braked. He did not lay on the horn, because the pit had taught him that a frightened animal, in a tight space, does the opposite of what the noise wants, and he had learned to wait an animal out rather than push it. He waited. And then she went all at once, not across the road, but back into the trees she had been staring at, which no deer does. A deer runs away from what scares it, and she ran straight into it, and the brush took her with a sound like a zipper, and then there was nothing. He should have driven on. He knows that now, and he half knew it then. His low beam had caught something on the shoulder, where she had bolted, a pale shape low in the weeds, and the part of him that had spent 22 years not leaving a job half-read, put the truck in park, and reached for the spotlight he kept clipped under the dash for night counts at the pit. He did not get out. He rolled the window down 2 inches and put the spotlight beam through the gap and swept the shoulder, and the pale shape resolved into a deer's hindquarter, hide and bone, the cut so clean it looked sawn, and no blood on the gravel around it that the beam could find. A deer does not come apart clean. He had dressed enough of them to know how they come apart, which is to say raggedly, with effort, and this had come apart like a thing pulled in two by hands that did not feel the strain. That was when the breathing started, and the spotlight beam was suddenly the worst idea he had ever had. A bright line drawn straight from him to whatever stood past the rail, and he killed it. He killed the dome light. He killed the dash. He sat in a cab gone black on a road with no other headlights in either direction, 19 miles from his own gate and 11 from the diner, and he listened to a thing breathe 40 feet away in the dark and understood, with a flat certainty that had nothing to do with belief, that it was listening back. His phone was in the cup holder. He looked at it without picking it up. 1 bar, then none, then 1. Route 9 ran a dead corridor through the gap between Hollis Ridge and the river bottom, and the carrier had promised a tower for 6 years and put up a sign instead. He had cursed that dead zone 100 times for ordinary reasons. A load delayed, a part not ordered, a wife who worried when he ran late. Maren would be at the kitchen table now with the baby monitor turned up and the porch light on, doing the things she did where she said she was reading and was really listening for the truck. She was 31 and 7 months along, and she did not panic, which was one of the reasons he had married her, but she counted. He had watched her do it the night her mother went into the hospital, sit at the table and lay out the calls she would make in order, who first, who after, what she would say to each, building a structure to stand inside while the world tilted. She did the same with his lateness. If he was 40 minutes past when he should be, she called the diner. If the diner had not seen him, if the Pitts nightman had not seen him, she called the county, and only then, only after the orderly sequence had run dry, would she let herself be afraid. There was a sequence to her worry, orderly as a checklist, and he loved her for it, and right now, it was the only system in the world that might come looking. And it would not start for another half hour, because he was not yet 40 minutes late, he was 22 minutes late, and he had counted that too, sitting in the dark. Because counting was the one thing his hands could do without moving. The breathing changed. Not louder. Closer. The catch at the top of the draw came from a few feet nearer than before, and Dale had not heard a single footstep cover that distance. No gravel shift, no branch, nothing, and a thing the size of that breath did not move that quiet on this ground. He thought of the Hall Road at the pit, how he could tell a man's weight by the crunch of his boots from inside the office, and he thought, whatever that is, it weighs more than a man and it crossed gravel without a sound. And the thought sat in him cold and complete, and he did not try to argue it down. He had a logic for fear, built over years. Fear of the unknown was the worst kind. His father had told him on a roof, in a wind that wanted to take them both, because the mind fills the dark with everything at once, and the cure was to name the thing and make it one thing. A bear. It could be a bear, and the county had black bear. He had seen sign at the pit, scat and clawed stumps, and once a sow with cubs at the settling pond, and he had backed away from that sow the right way, slow and sideways, and talking low, and she had let him go because a bear is a thing with rules a man can learn. A bear breathed heavy. A bear could pull a deer, though not clean. Never clean, a bear opened a carcass the way a bear opened everything, with a careless strength that left a mess, and the hindquarter on the shoulder had no mess in it. He set that objection aside because he wanted the bear. He wanted it badly, the way a man wants the cheaper of two diagnoses, and he reached for the explanation and got his hand around it, and then the breathing rose up, and he means up, the source of it lifted, the way a sound moves when a thing stands. And it came from a height no bear reaches on 4 legs, and only briefly on 2. And it stayed there. It did not drop back down. A bear that stands drops back to all 4s inside a few seconds, because standing is work, and a bear is built to walk. This stood and held standing the way a man holds standing, as a resting position and not an effort, and it breathed at him from above the rail, 6 feet 7, and the bear came apart in his hands like the deer had come apart on the gravel, cleanly, leaving nothing he could use. He keeps a flashlight in the door pocket, a good one, and his thumb found the switch and did not press it. Light had cost him already. Light was a line that pointed both ways. He sat with his thumb on the switch and his other hand on the key, and he did the math. He did at the pit. When a thing went wrong, the cold inventory, engine off, would turn over. The starter was new in March. Doors locked. He had locked them out of habit at the diner and never unlocked. Window down 2 inches. He ran it up slow, and the motor of it sounded like a scream in the quiet. And he stopped it with an inch to go, because the last inch was the loudest and he could not make himself pay it. The thing outside went still when the window stopped. The breathing did not pause. It simply held position, neither nearer nor farther, the way a man holds his breath to hear better. And in that held moment, Dale became aware of the smell, which had been there the whole time, and which his mind had been too busy to file. Wet dog was the closest he could come, but wrong. A wet dog left too long in a closed truck in August, with something mineral under it, the iron smell of the deer's open hindquarter, and beneath that a sourness like a kennel run that no one had hosed in a season. He had smelled bad things in 22 years, a fox dead in a culvert at the pit through a July, a settling pond gone over in the heat, the inside of a haul truck after a man got sick in it, and none of them was this, because all of those were the smell of a thing ending, of rot doing its slow work, warm and present, and producing the smell. Now, in real time, on the other side of an inch of glass, it came in through the inch of open window. He could not run the window the last inch without the noise, and he could not bear the smell. And he sat caught between the two and understood that this was a kind of choosing the thing had built for him, and that it had built it knowing he would sit in it rather than make the noise, which meant it had taken his measure as surely as he was trying to take its, and was the better measurer of the two. A long time passed. He could not say how long, because his watch was on his left wrist and his left hand was on the key, and he would not move it, but the cold had come up through the floor of the cab and into his boots. So it was a while the breathing stayed. Twice it circled. He heard it pass behind the truck from the rail side to the roadside and back. No footfall, only the breath traveling. And the second time it passed the roadside, it stopped at his door, at his window. The inch of open glass. He looked straight ahead through the windshield at the white line, and he did not turn his head, because turning his head would put his face an inch from whatever was breathing through that gap, and he had decided somewhere in the cold that he would not give it his face. It breathed on the glass. The inch of open window fogged from the outside, a slow bloom of warm damp on the cold glass, and the fog was high. The fog started at the top of the window and spread down, which meant the source of the breath was level with the top of the window or above it, which meant it was bending down to reach him. He watched the fog spread in the edge of his vision, and he kept his eyes on the white line, and he thought of Marin at the table, and the monitor turned up, and the small, fast heartbeat the doctor had let him hear on Tuesday. A sound like a horse run flat out and far away, and he thought, I am not getting out of this truck. And the thought was not panic. It was a decision, and making it steadied him. The chatter came again, the second sound under the breath, and this close he could feel it. Came through the door, through the seat, into the long bones of him, a fast, low vibration with no rhythm he could name, and it was not a growl. A growl is one throat. This was layered, a draw of breath over a rumble over that chatter, 3 things at once out of one source. And his pit-trained ear tried to separate the channels the way he separated the sound of a failing bearing from a failing belt, and could not, because the channels did not belong to any machine, and did not belong to any animal he had a name for, and the failure to name it was worse than the sound. Headlights bent around the curve to the south. He saw them in the mirror first, 2 white cones swinging up out of the river bottom, and his whole body wanted to lunge for the horn and the lights, and he did not, because the breathing at his window had stopped the instant the cones appeared, and stillness from that thing was its own information. The far headlights climbed toward him. Whatever stood at his door did not move and did not breathe, and Dale held just as still, 2 animals waiting on the same headlight, and as the oncoming truck closed to 100 yards, the thing at his window was simply gone. No sound of leaving, the smell thinning from the inch of glass, the fog already shrinking back. And by the time the other truck blew past in a wall of light and wind and a long, flat note of a horn at a parked vehicle in a dark place, the shoulder beside Dale held nothing. His mirror could show him but weeds and the pale, wrong shape of the hindquarter, and he had his own engine turning over before the other truck's tail lights were gone. He did not stop at the diner. He did not stop until his own gate, where he sat in a yard with the high beams on the gravel and his hands on the wheel, until he stopped shaking enough to turn the truck off. And then he went in, and Maren took one look at his face and set down the book she had not been reading, and said his name once, a question. And he said he had hit a deer, and it had shaken him. And they all 3 heard the lie land, Maren and Dale, and the part of Dale that did not lie at the diner counter, because the truck had no mark on it. And they both knew the sound a struck deer made, and he had not made it tonight. He told her the truth at the table near 2 in the morning. Not all of it, the shape of it. A thing on Route 9. Big. Wrong. He left out the fog on the glass and the smell, because she was 7 months along, and there are kindnesses that are also cowardice, and he has never sorted out which that one was. She did not laugh. She did not tell him he was tired. She poured him a glass of water he did not drink, and sat across from him with her hands flat on the table, the way she sat when she was deciding to believe a hard thing. And she asked him 3 questions, the way she asked the doctor questions, one at a time. She asked how big, and he held his hand at the height the breathing had risen to, and watched her eyes follow it up and stop. And she asked if he had seen it, and he said no, that he had kept his face to the windshield and not given it his face. And she did not ask why a man would not look, because she understood. He could see that she understood, that not looking had been the only move left on the board. And then she asked the 3rd question, which was the one that mattered. She asked if it had followed him. And he had checked the mirror the whole way home, every curve, every straightaway where a thing could pace a truck along the tree line, and there had been nothing. And he told her no, and she nodded and got up and went down the hall, and he heard her check the latch on the nursery window that they had not yet filled with a crib. Only a painted wall and a rug and a register that ticked as the furnace ran. And Dale sat at the table and listened to his wife check a latch on an empty room at 2 in the morning, and felt the cold come back up through his boots in a warmed kitchen. And he did not go and tell her the latch did not matter, because he did not know that it did not. And a man does not take from his wife the one small bolt she has found to throw. He called the county in the morning. He is not a man who calls the county. He had not called them when a man dumped a truckload of shingles in the pit access road. He had moved the shingles himself, and he had not called them the time a hunter cut his fence. He had mended the fence and watched the gap a week and let it go. Calling was a thing he did not do, and he did it now, standing in the pit office at 7, with the cast wrapped in his jacket on the desk in front of him, and the coffee going cold in his hand. He gave the dispatcher the mile marker, near the one that read 14 on the green sign. And he described the deer, the clean cut, the lack of blood. And he did not describe the breathing, because there is no mile marker for that. The dispatcher was kind and bored and asked him to spell his last name, and asked, was the animal in the roadway or off it, a roadway hazard or not? and when he said off it, on the shoulder, in the weeds, he heard the small change in her voice. That meant the call had moved from one cue to a slower one. She said she would log it, and that the road crew might swing by for the carcass when they were down that way, and she asked if he wanted a callback, and he said no, because a callback meant explaining, and there was nothing in the deer he could explain that would not cost him the credibility he had spent his life banking. He hung up knowing the carcass would still be there because nothing about Route 9 ran on a schedule that included him. And he was right. The carcass was gone 3 days later, but not because the county had come, and the green spray paint they marked a pickup with, and the queue she had logged him into was the whole of the institution that existed to help him. A woman with a screen who had done her job exactly right and left him exactly as alone as he had been at 11:51 in the dark with the window down an inch. He should have let it go. A man with a pit to run and a child coming does not have margin for a thing he cannot name. The trouble was that he had spent his life unable to leave a load half read, and there was a piece of the night still unmeasured, and the not measuring of it sat in him like a stone in a boot. So 3 days later, in full daylight, in the flat, safe light of a Tuesday afternoon, with the sun high and the river loud, he drove back to mile 14 and parked on the same gravel and got out, which he had not been able to do at night, and he walked the shoulder with a tape measure, the way he walked a slope failure at the pit to find out what the ground would tell him the hindquarter was gone. The road crew had not come. He knew they had not come because the orange paint they sprayed by a carcass was not on the gravel. So something else had come for it, and the place where it had lain was a flattened oval in the weeds, with the grass laid down in one direction, combed flat the way grass lies under a thing that has crouched there a while. He measured the oval 4 feet by something over 6. He wrote the numbers on his palm because the pencil was for the other thing, the thing he had found at the edge of the gravel where the shoulder dropped to the ditch, pressed into the soft mud the river kept wet all summer, a single clear track that stopped his breath the way the breathing had stopped it. It was not a paw. It was not a boot. It had the long heel and the spread of a foot meant to bear weight upright, but the toes ran too long and ended in points that had dug past the pad into the mud. 4 of them and a 5th set off to the side and lower, and the whole of it ran 11 inches from heel to the longest point, which he knew because he laid the tape in the mud beside it, and read the number twice, and wrote it on his palm under the oval, and the depth of it in ground that took his own boot. A 1/4 inch took this a full inch, and more, which meant weight, real weight. And he crouched there in the safe afternoon light and did the arithmetic, and the arithmetic said a thing heavier than him had stood here on 2 feet that were not feet. And the arithmetic did not care that such a thing could not be. He looked for the second track and the stride that would join them, because 1 print is an accident and 2 is a gait. And he found the second 11 feet up the shoulder. 11 feet, a single stride that would have torn his own hip to attempt. And between the 2 prints the weeds stood undisturbed, no scuff, no dragged upmer. The ground untouched in the span a man would have had to cross in 3 steps, and this had crossed in 1. He measured the stride twice as well. He stood in the place a body would have to stand to leave both prints, and found there was no such place, that the geometry asked for a leg longer than the 11-inch foot implied, and the mismatch sat in him the way a survey that did not close sat in him 2 lines of measurement, except a survey that did not close meant a man had made an error, and Dale did not make those errors, and he checked his tape against the prints a 3rd time the way he would reshoot a bad shot, and the tape said what it had said. He took the photographs, and he knew before he took them how they would come out. He had a pit full of slope failures and equipment damage documented on that same phone, and he knew the camera made everything small and ordinary, made a 40-foot high wall look like a curb, and the track in the mud through the small, bright screen looked like nothing, like a smear, like a place a boot had slipped, and he hated the phone for it. Hated how it shrank the one piece of proof he had into a thing the dispatcher would file and forget. He put his folding rule in the frame, beside the track for scale. And it did not help the screen flattened the depth out of it, took the inch of pressed mud, and made it red level. And a thing that is not there in a photograph might as well not be there at all to any man who is not crouched in the mud beside it with the smell still in his memory. He took 11 photographs anyway, from every angle, low and square and raking across to catch the depth and shadow. And the raking one was the only one that held any of the truth, and even it would not survive a skeptic. He had not planned to cast it, except that on the drive out he had stopped at the feed store on a hunch he had not examined and bought a bag of dental stone, the kind a man used for hoof models, and now he understood the hunch, and he mixed the stone in the zip bag with water from his thermos, working it with his fingers through the plastic until the lumps were gone, and poured it slow into the print the way he poured a test cylinder, from a low height, letting it find the corners. And he built a little dam of mud around the heel where the stone wanted to run. Then he waited the 40 minutes for it to set, sitting in his truck with the doors locked in broad daylight, watching the tree line out of habit he had not had a week ago, and when he lifted the cast the points came up clean and long and wrong, every detail the screen had lost held in the white stone. The 4 long toes and the 5th set low and off to the side and the depth of the heel, and he wrapped it in his jacket like it was a thing that could break, or a thing that could wake. His neighbor to the south of the pit was a man named Asa Ruel, 81. A trapper his whole life, and a logger before that, who had run lines through the Hollis Ridge Gap before the road was paved, and who did not exaggerate either, which was why Dale trusted him. Dale brought him the cast on the porch, and did not say where he had found it or what he thought it was, only set it on the rail and asked Asa what made it. Asa picked it up in 2 hands that shook a little with age and not at all with fear, and he turned it in the light, and he ran a thumb along the long points, and he was quiet for a while, in the way of a man choosing whether to spend words. The old man's porch smelled of wood smoke and the linseed oil he kept his traps in, and a coffee can of bent nails sat on the rail beside the cast. And Dale watched Asa's face and saw nothing move in it, no surprise, only a kind of recognition settling the way a man's face settles when a doctor names the thing he already knew he had. Then he set it down careful, the way Dale had set it down. And he said he had pulled his lines out of the gap in 1971 and moved them 10 miles east and never told anyone why. And he said it the way a man confesses a thing he has carried. And Dale did not ask the why because the cast on the rail had already said it. And the 2 of them looked at the long points in the afternoon light, and neither named the thing, because there was no name. Either of them would put his weight on. Asa talked, then, slow the way a man talks who has decided to set a load down at last. He said in the winter of that year he had come on his own line, froze and snapped, every set sprung and emptied, not robbed by another trapper, because a robbing man takes the fur, and these were left, the catch torn out and dropped beside the trap in the snow, and around each set a track he had measured against his own snowshoe, and found longer, and a smell on the cold air he had carried in his memory for 50 years, and smelled again faintly, coming off the cast in Dale's jacket, though he did not say that last part. He only looked at the wrapped jacket on the rail, and did not touch it again. He said he had run lines 40 years after that and never lost his nerve in the woods. That he had treed a bear at 19 and skinned it where it fell. That the woods did not frighten him and did not now. The Gap was not the woods. The Gap was a place inside the woods that kept its own rule, and a man learned the rule, or a man learned why there was a rule, and Asa had chosen to learn it the easy way, by moving his lines 10 miles and never going back, and he had lived to 81 doing it, and he looked at Dale when he said that last. the way a man looks when he is handing across something he once received. Asa told him one thing more, on the steps. As Dale was leaving with the cast, wrapped again in his jacket, he said the Gap had a rule that the old men knew and the new men paved over. You did not stop on that ground after dark. Not for a deer, not for a downed line, not for a stranger waving you down. You drove the Gap and you came out the other side, and whatever you saw in the trees, you kept your wheels turning, because the ground in the Gap belonged to something that allowed passage and did not allow guests